There we go. We're on.
Alright everyone, thanks for making it tonight. It seems a few people got caught up in traffic, so that's alright. Watch on Facebook. I guess tonight's pretty relaxed. We're here to try and give you tips and advice that maybe you haven't heard. Some of it will be things that you've heard before, but if you've got any questions, just ask. First we're going to start with lovely Steve from our Blue Circle, our mortgage broker. He's going to discuss your questions about deposits, just facts in terms of what the banks are looking at now when applying, how long the process takes, so he'll go through all of that. Then we've got lovely Sandra from Velocity, who's just in Belconnen, just down the end of the road. She'll talk to you about what conveyances are, what they do, why they're important. I guess the dangers that you can get in if you don't have a conveyancer go over the contract for you and give advice. And then myself and Mark will just have a bit of a chat about what we see some of the common mistakes are that buyers make when they're looking to buy, wants versus needs, and how to go about offers. Then at the end, you can ask some questions. We've had some people message us some questions, so we'll go through that. And yeah, it's pretty relaxed, so just if you need anything, just let us know. But we'll hand it over to you, Steve. You can kick off.
Thanks, Sarah. Well, thanks everyone for coming. Nice to see you here tonight. And look, my role initially is just to try and give you a little bit of information, and there's so much that is out there. There's so much that you're probably going to hear tonight from everyone here as well. So I've just sort of tried to break it down just to do a few simple sort of things. And if you've got any technical questions, we'll do a bit of a Q&A at the end. And obviously, you grab our details if you like, and feel free to contact us after tonight, and we can certainly answer any of your technical questions along the way as well. So when we were talking about getting this together, we thought, well, who should go first? And the reason Sarah's picked the finance guy to go first is because so very often that's the most important thing to understand initially. So it's not more important than other parts, but it's important to understand that up front, so that essentially you know how much you can borrow, so that you can shop for the right property. Basically, there's no point going to visit $1 million properties if you can only borrow and pay for $500,000. So again, logical that you should get your finance sorted out up front, and then you know exactly how much you can borrow. Now there's no one size fits all. There's different lenders basically will be able to lend different amounts depending on your circumstances, and that's where the role of a broker comes in to our own, because we've got a range of lenders, 30, 40 plus lenders that we can select from. So some lenders have policies that suit certain types of borrowers. Other lenders that we use will be able to more suited for different borrowers as well. So again, we can pick and choose which lender is going to be suitable to your profile based on your income, your debts, your history, your credit ratings. For instance, some lenders will look at credit scoring. So again, that's something else that we can perhaps talk about later. I haven't really included that in here tonight too much, but a credit score is something that stays with you right throughout your adult life, basically. And some lenders use that as a key marker for how much they'll lend you, or if indeed they will lend money to you. And other lenders will ignore that and just look at your case as it's presented to them. Okay, so how much can you borrow? Well, what we basically do is we get our what we call our calculator, and we look at your income and your expenses, and if there's any ongoing debts and what have you, we pop that into the calculator, and there's a buffer in there that allows for if interest rates are going to move a little bit, and or if incomes change and that sort of thing. So from that, we can determine what we think your borrowing capacity will be, and as I say, from lender to lender, that does vary quite a bit, and hence that's the reason why it's good to sort of come back to someone when you sort of get to that point. You think, how much do I want to go forward with this? How much can I borrow? It's good to get someone who can tell you exactly what it is based on the appropriate lender for you. So how much deposit do I need is another question that's frequently asked. Okay, and the simple question is as much as you possibly can afford. All right. Now, one of the key factors is ideally people say 20% is a great marker, and the reason they do that is because At that point in time, there's another thing that kicks in called lender's mortgage insurance. Okay, if you haven't got 20% deposit, then you may need to pay lender's mortgage insurance. All right, and that insurance doesn't cover you; it covers the bank. So you have to pay for it, but it covers the bank that you might not be able to make your payments. Okay, so it's an insurance policy that you pay for to cover the bank. So ideally, you don't want to get into that territory, and you want to have 20%. But by the same token, there's the discussion and the argument: are you better off getting into a market sooner rather than later? And if you've got to pay $2,000 or $3,000 for lender's mortgage insurance, is that better that you get into a property now rather than trying to save another $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 to have that 20% deposit? Okay, so these are some of the numbers that you might need to look at and consider whether that's the right timing and the right thing for you to do at that point in time. Okay, so lender's mortgage insurance, as I say, typically that kicks in at 20%. However, we do have some lenders where they will borrow, or rather they will lend to you 85%, but typically with that comes a higher interest rate. So again, the aim would be to try and get to 20% deposit is your short answer, but again, everyone's different. Now, some simple costs of buying a house. Let's just run through a few of those. Stamp duty. Now, Sandra's going to talk quite a lot about that side of things, so I won't go into that, but these are costs that are factors that you need to, when you're pulling your finance together, be able to cover. Okay. Now, if you've got, if you have to pay stamp duty, that's not an amount that you can borrow. You have to pay for that out of your own cash. So, as well as that 20% deposit, you've got to pay for that. Now, being first home buyers, you guys, that won't be applicable for, which is great. And again, I'll let Sandra talk more about that. But just an awareness there that stamp duty is something that you can't borrow when you come to that point down the track. Okay. Lender's mortgage insurance we talked about. Fees for legal costs. There'll be a small charge there as well. Mortgage and loan application fees. Again, the banks will charge small fees for that sort of thing as well. There'll be additional costs from government charges. Again, we're talking a few $100s where they register the mortgage and things like that. And some of those can come out of your funds that you borrow. But it's just, again, some of these costs, it's important that you factor these into your calculations when you're working out how much you can borrow and how much you need to purchase something. Various reports, I'll let Sarah and Mark talk about those as we go forward, but again, their costs, utility connections, and insurance as well. Potentially there's a need for insurance to cover things up front. So, in summary, where do we start? Well, it's important that you need to budget and save. All right, there's a few things that we need to consider when we're doing that. What your expenses are. So it's important that you can try and get a budget together. It gives you a really good idea of what your weekly expenses, your monthly expenses are, and how you then might be able to actually retain more funds for yourself and build that little nest egg for the savings there. Okay. As I said to start with, really important that you get advice. That includes advice from a broker, advice from a conveyancer, and of course the professional advice from a real estate agent. Because there's a whole range of things that obviously tonight's meant to cover off why we need to have an understanding on things. So little things that you just don't think about or you haven't heard of before because you're new to this process. So do your research as well. There are various funds available, and I've left that in here because if you're considering buying in New South Wales and whether you're looking at something just over the border, whether that be in Sutton or Queanbeyan or wherever the case may be, there are still grants available in those locations in New South Wales. So make sure you've done your research on what's out there and available. And then coming back to where we started, make sure once you've done your numbers and you work out how much you can borrow and how much savings you've got, okay, work out what your budget is, because again, you don't want to exceed that because you just may well blow yourself out of the water and you'll end up trying to recover from that and potentially spiral downwards. So really important that you're quite disciplined with that. Okay, and once we've done all that, as it says here, then you're almost ready to start looking for a property. Okay, so again, I'll be around. We'll do the Q&A session at the end, and I'll hand it back to
I thought while I've got you, I might just ask you a couple questions.
Yeah, brilliant.
So how do things like when the banks check the last 3 months of bank statements?
Yep.
That's the main thing. So how, I know we talked before, triggers that they're cautious about things like any gambling accounts, a big red flag?
Absolutely. So one of the things, so I talked about your expenses in your budget and setting that, but one of the key things when we're looking at applications now are the expenses. Banks want to know 3 months of they want to see your last 3 months of your transaction expense, and they'll look through it quite closely to look at what expenses you've got there. Now, if it's just your average sort of food and these types of expenses, then obviously they're very comfortable with that. But we also need to actually tell them how much we're spending as well. And obviously, the less we spend, the more we can save. So we need to be considered in terms of how much we are spending going forward. But they do look at a whole range of things like gambling in particular, even if you've got an expense that at the club you're spending $100 every second night, there'll be questions coming back as to why that's happening, what's going on, is there a problem? And you've got to remember when you're dealing with banks, you're talking about organisations that are just focused on risk. So if they see risky behaviour, they really don't like it. And so it's all about modifying our behaviour. And look, it's only 3 months that we need to provide. So we've done this with many clients in the past where, you know, if they've had a tab account, you just tell them, shut that down. If you really want to buy a house, you can't go playing in that space because the banks just don't want risk. Okay? So if you want a house, you need to make a bit of a commitment for saving and your lifestyle with some of those things as well.
And I know you mentioned serviceability. So for example, if someone gets a loan at 3%, the bank's going to work out maybe that if the interest they can pay it at say 5.5. That's changed recently though. So maybe anyone's gone, maybe 5 months ago when it got an application, there's a potential that maybe that the banks might be a bit more.
That's all.
More
Yeah. So look, only a month ago that they changed the rates, and they were up around 7% is what the banks were checking them at, and they've now dropped down to about 5.5%. So that's a significant drop, and as Sarah rightly points out, potentially people who couldn't get enough money or couldn't quite get the loan they wanted 3, 4, 5 months ago could very much get a loan now with the same numbers because that buffer has dropped down. Okay, and that's dropped down because obviously the main interest rates have also correspondingly dropped down as well. With the Reserve Bank now, only 1% as their market rate there.
I think we'll leave the rest of the questions to the end, but I think there are some the main ones that people sent through about the changes of serviceability and risk factor. Oh, one other one. Would you recommend it's good for? I know there's a few services where people can get their credit report, maybe to check in and have a look before they apply. Sometimes I know, an old Vodafone bill that they've put on and you've moved address and you didn't know they've sent the collectors and reported on you.
Absolutely. Yeah, look, that's not uncommon, but we get that sort of thing where someone's moved address and they've had an old phone bill or electricity bill and not been paid or whatever. That can be fixed relatively quickly. So even if you've got a mark on your credit record, if we can pay that and we can provide evidence and what the story was, it's a really, really quick fix. So it's not the end of the earth, and it is really great advice to be aware of what your credit score is along the way there. So there's a range of services that provide that, and you can certainly just Google that online and find out your credit score.
Thank you very much, Steve. Sandra's going to talk to us about conveyancing, changes in the stamp duty for ACT, which is another factor which has opened up for a lot of people. Not having to spend $10,000 on stamp duty maybe means that deposit at 20% is a bit closer for you now as well.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks, Steve. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming along tonight. So my name's Sandra. I'm from Velocity Conveyancing. So our Belconnen branch is just down the road here. We do have other branches around town as well. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit tonight about the process of conveyancing and what conveyancing is. And I'll also let you know some recent changes that you guys are probably going to be very interested in. So the first homeowners grant that was available for first home buyers, it was recently only available for new properties, brand new properties. So they've deleted that, it's gone. But what they have done is they've introduced the stamp duty concession that can now be applied to established homes. So hopefully that's opening up the market now for people that want to get into an established property rather than sort of having to buy brand new. So there's a couple of things about the stamp duty concession. There is a income limit, and it's based on a family income. So even if you're just buying on your own and you're the only one that's going to be on the contract, if you've got a partner, husband, you're in a domestic relationship, then when you're applying for the stamp duty concession, the ACT Revenue Office want you to also take into consideration your partner's income. So the household income is $160,000. They do allow a little bit extra for each dependent child that you have. So you can always talk to us about that later if it's needed. But generally looking at not being able to go over too much by $160,000. So yes, established properties as well as new, of course, it's still applicable on the new, but it introduces established properties for you. You can't own property, any other property. So it is generally first home buyers. There are some exemptions from owning other properties. So there are certain circumstances that the Revenue Office will take into consideration. So if you do have other property and you've got that through an inheritance or something like that, you can talk to us about that. It may not necessarily rule you out. You have to live in the property, so at least one applicant has to live in the property for a continuous period of 12 months, starting from the first year after the transaction. So if you're looking at a property that might currently have tenants in it, you're not necessarily ruled out from that. So as long as that tenancy is going to end within 12 months and allow you to move into that property before the 12 months of your settlement date is up, then you could still consider that property. So that's something to keep in mind. But you do have to, once you've moved in within that 12-month period, you have to stay there and live there for 12 months. A concession code has to be written down onto the transfer document. So when we're at settlement or after settlement, the transfer document gets registered at the Land Titles Office, and that's what actually puts the property into your name. Someone's having a good time out there.
I'm not sure what kind of taekwondo that is.
Singing taekwondo.
So the transfer document will get registered into your name after settlement. That's what's going to put the property into your name. So at that time, that's when we've got to be able to notify the Revenue Office that you're eligible for a concession. So during our conveyancing process, we'll talk to you about whether you're eligible, and if you are, there's a link to the ACT Revenue Office that we put you onto. There's a couple of questions you follow to confirm that you're eligible, and at the end it's going to spit out a code for you. And so you let us know that code, we'll go through that and check that with you as well, and then we make sure we put that on the transfer document before the settlement's done. Deferred duty, so the Revenue Office still allows for a deferred duty. Now, if you're a first home buyer, and you're going for this concession and you're under the household income, generally you shouldn't need to defer stamp duty because there shouldn't be any stamp duty for you. The good thing is with the new changes that they've made recently on the 1st of July was it doesn't matter how high the property value is. It used to limit the property value as well. That's gone. So now it's just your household income that's limited. And then there's a couple of other pensioner duties that are available as well, so we can always talk to you about that. That's obviously more for older people looking to buy. So they're just recent changes that they've made. So I'll go through a bit of the process of how conveyancing works. So when you've found a property, so obviously Steve mentioned it's always a good idea to go and talk to your bank before that process, because you want to make sure that you're going to be able to buy the property that you're interested in. Once the property's been found and you're happy with it and you've made an offer that's been accepted by the owner, that's when you want to come and look at us. And most of the agents at that time are going to ask you who your conveyancers or who your lawyers are. So you'll give them those details, and then they'll arrange for some sales instructions to be sent off to both the seller's side and the buyer's side for legal representation. And it's at that point that we're able to get a file opened and we get the contract in from the seller's solicitor. So in the ACT, it's the seller's solicitor or conveyancer that produces the contract. There's always a marketing contract available before an offer is made on a property. So before the agents are actually able to start advertising the property for sale, there's got to be a marketing contract available. So we always recommend that if you go through a property at an open home or whatever, you like the look of it and you think, yep, we think this is worth putting an offer in, it's always good to get a copy of that marketing contract, because if you're looking at a house, you're going to have building reports in there. So you'll be able to have a look through, check out those building reports, make sure you're happy with what's in them, and then you're making your offer based on the building reports that are in that contract and based on the property that you're seeing at that time. So ACT is very much buyer beware. It's up to you to make sure that you're happy with the condition of the property, that you've looked through the building reports. Now in ACT, the sellers obtain the building reports and put them in the contract, but buyer does reimburse the cost of them at the end. So the liability for those is transferred over to the buyer. So some people might get a little bit worried that it's the seller's property and the sellers are the one that have obtained the reports, but there's a certain liability there that transfers with the transaction and when you pay for those building reports at the end. So you've got a bit of protection there. So once you've got that offer in and that's been accepted, we'll get you into the office and go through the contract for sale with you. We'll let you know the legal side of it, let you know the terms and conditions that you're going to be locking into. One major factor from our point of view is to not let you lock into a contract until you've got that finance approval. Now, hopefully before you've gone and made an offer on a property, you've gone through that process of seeing a broker and you've got your pre-approval to say, yep, go ahead, here's what you can spend. But we always look for what we call unconditional loan approval before we let you lock into the contract. Now, that's going to allow time for the broker, you go back to the broker when the property's found and the price is accepted, and the broker will then go through their processes, normally to value the property and make sure that the offer you've made is what the bank think that the property is worth or it's in that vicinity. And then they'll generally finish off their checks and provide that unconditional loan approval to you. And it's at that point that we look at being able to lock you into the contract once that unconditional's through. So once you've got to contract, that's called exchange. So locking you into the contract is the point of exchange of contracts. It's basically after that, you're stuck. We can't get you out. So your deposit's paid, it's locked in. Generally deposits here in Canberra are held with the real estate agent's trust account. So they're like considered a mutual party. And they'll hold on to that deposit until the settlement's done. And after settlement, they'll release the deposit to the seller. But once that exchange has taken place and you're locked into that contract, very hard for us to get you out of it. So we want to make sure that you're happy with everything, your finance is all approved, you've checked it. Another point is we always like to recommend you check appliances are all working in the property, because again, you're buying that property in its current condition. So it's really good at the time that you're making that offer, or you're going through that open home and thinking, yeah, this is a property we want to put an offer in. Check the appliances while you're there. Turn the oven and the stove on. Make sure the heating or the cooling is working, because it's too late after you've exchanged to then go back and go, oh, I want to check these things. You do get to do a final inspection just before your settlement. That's generally to make sure that the property is in the same condition that it was in at the time of exchange. So if you haven't actually checked those appliances and those things before the exchange, you've got nothing to compare it to at the end. So it's a good idea to check those things before we lock you into the contract as well. So once the exchange is done, there's a couple of things we have to do. If you're buying an established property, we go through and we order rates inquiries on those properties. So that's part of the adjustments that we make in the settlement figures at the end. So that's the job of your lawyer or your conveyancer to make sure that we've checked where the seller is currently paid up to with their rates on the land. And that they're not behind or anything like that. And if they are, we make sure that they're all fixed up at settlement. So you've got a clean slate with the Revenue Office and Icon Water with your rates. You're only paying from the time you own that property onwards, okay? So the stamp duty has changed a little bit. You'll have a sheet in the folders there. We've got stamp duty in there as being paid before settlement. So these sheets are a little bit old with the stamp duty, and because now you can pay stamp duty after settlement, so if you're over the income threshold and stamp duty is still required to be paid, it's now actually not paid until after the settlement's taken place, which is good. Generally from the ACT Revenue Office, about 2 or 3 weeks after settlement, you get a stamp duty notice if you do have to pay stamp duty. And then from that notice point, they'll give you an extra 2 weeks to pay. So you don't have to necessarily come up with the stamp duty before the settlement anymore, but you've got to make sure you've got it available to pay when it's due. So signing mortgage documents is another part that you'll do generally between that exchange and settlement process. So we'll make sure you've got your loan approval before we lock you in, but quite often there's still some mortgage documents that need to be produced after that point and signed. Generally, your brokers will help you out with the signing of the mortgage documents. If you're required to have independent legal advice on those, we can also assist with that sort of stuff. You just need to let us know. A lot of the time these days in the ACT, mortgage documents can just be signed, like be witnessed by someone over 18 years. But certainly if you're worried about them or you feel that you want legal advice on them, you're not 100% sure what you're doing and you want that legal advice, then let us know. We can also help with that. Once we've got our property inquiries, we know where everyone's up to with rates, payments, we then go to organising the settlement. So once you've signed your mortgage documents with the bank, they'll all get sent back to wherever they need to come from. So these days, not very much is done in Canberra. I think Steve you'd agree, it all comes from Adelaide or Melbourne or Sydney. So the documents will go back to the bank's department for checking. They'll certify them all, make sure you've signed everywhere you've got to sign, and then they will let your solicitor or your conveyancer know that they are ready to take a settlement booking. And then generally the banks will usually want about 2 or 3 days notice from that point of settlement booking, and then we take care of booking the settlement in with your bank, letting them know where and when they need to meet us with the money that's available from your loan funds, and then we'll meet them at the settlement room in town. They'll bring the funds available from your loan. Once we've got that loan funds available, we can let you guys know whether there's a shortfall. So if you're putting in extra, if you've got a bit sitting in your bank waiting for the settlement, we'll be able to calculate all that for you a day or two before settlement, let you know what the shortfall is and how that needs to be paid. A lot of the times these days the banks can organise that shortfall account through with the settlement money as well. You can provide an authority for the bank to draw the shortfall from a nominated account. That certainly makes the settlement process a lot easier, and it saves you guys having to run around on the morning of settlement or the afternoon before getting bank checks and bringing them into us. So that's another thing that you can always talk to your brokers about setting up. But yeah, otherwise we can let you know the shortfall, we'll book the bank, and then we arrange the settlement. Now the settlements in Canberra can happen any day, Monday to Friday, but they're always done in the afternoons these days. So Canberra's quite small really when it comes to the scheme of things. So we still all meet in a room in town. The banks are all there, the solicitors, conveyancers from either side are there, and we organise the relevant documents to be picked up, collected, and dropped off to where they've got to go, and it all happens in one room, so it's quite civilised. And that settlement process, although there's no set time for it to happen, generally it's anywhere between about 2 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So you don't normally get your keys for the property until quite late in the afternoon, generally around 3:30, 4 o'clock, you'd get that phone call saying it's all done and you can pick up your keys. There are occasions when the keys are handed over at the settlement. More so these days, they tend to be handed over through the agents at the end of the day. So once your conveyancers or solicitors let you know that your settlement's all done, you can give the agent a call and go and organise to pick up the keys to your new house. So that's the conveyancing process. Sarah, did you have any quick questions for me?
No, and I think you did really well with the opera singer practice in the background. Kept your composure, thought it might change your tone. No, I think we'll do
So we can do your questions and answers at the
Yeah,
end?
yeah.
Okay, hopefully that was informative.
Yeah, I picked up a few things I didn't realise. I didn't realise now it comes in handy for me with the properties that have got tenants in place.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
that's it.
12 months, that's all right.
Yeah.
So Mark's now going to hand over to Mark, who's going to have a bit of a chat about what we've picked up with buyers, you know, how to work out what you actually want and need, because a lot of the time when we meet buyers, you know, what they think they need is actually what they want, and it sort of changes over time. So,
Thanks, Sarah. I guess first of all, congratulations for coming along. This is the biggest step. There's a lot of information that's coming at you. A lot of buyers out there are sort of just winging it, going to the first open home, going, "Can I buy this house?" And you're going, "Hang on, let's have a bit of a chat first." So, congratulations on being here. Yeah, as Sarah was saying, I'm here to talk to you mainly about wants and needs. I know it sounds pretty simple, but we have a lot of buyers come in. Even me here, I'll have a house just here around the corner here in Page, and it might not suit the buyer. And I say, look, I've got another one around in Scullen, just 30 seconds drive away, and they say, no, that's too far out. 6 weeks later, they've bought a house in Scullen. So they're not telling me exactly what they want. So try and figure out what it is exactly that you want. You may be looking at the time for a 4-bedroom house or a 3-bedroom house, but really a 2-bedroom maybe with a study nook might help, because you can do that work from home in the study nook, or where you need a double garage because you've got that expensive car that you never drive and you're never fixing up, or it's sitting there that you need that double car garage. So have a real good think about that and let your agents know. We're here to help, and the more you can tell us, the more we can help. As I said, the last thing that we want is thinking that you want a 3-bedroom house, and we're here working hard showing you 4, 5, 6 houses or 3-bedroom houses, and then you go to another agent down the road and you bought a 2-bedroom house and you're like, oh, I've got 5 or 6 of them sitting right here for you, we could have shown you through. So that's the biggest thing, I guess, that I can bring to you. As I said, there is a lot of information being thrown at you, but we're all here to help, and we're all here on your side. You guys are paying these guys, and not us yet, but when we go to sell later on. So we're all going to work on your behalf as well. So there's nothing, when you're going to buy a house, we can't sell you the house if there's something in there that you, what am I trying to say here?
Not aware.
You're not aware of, or something that may influence your decision of buying. Let's say there's a big power pole at the back, and we don't show you that because we're showing you at 7 o'clock at night and it's dark and you can't see it. So, we've got to be showing you that. So we're all here on your side. So definitely tell us everything. We've got to tell you where we think, and we'll be able to help out. Okay, but congratulations for being here. You're 2 steps ahead of most other guys out there. Any questions? Definitely give us a call. Thanks, Sarah.
No. Thank you, Mark. So in the pack we do have, we found a little spreadsheet or a little checklist that we sold off a broker's PDF. So it's got their info on, but what it does, you can sort of work through it either to, so we've got some, we can email it to you if you want to use it as a checklist when you're going to a property, but it might be also a good one for you to sit down with the pad that Steve's provided and say, okay, it goes through different things. Do I need a double garage, or would a single be alright for actually what I need? Does it have to be freshly painted, or am I actually willing to do that work? Some of the smaller details that maybe you don't get into, does it have to have a high energy rating, or do I have a friend who's a double glazer and I'm happy to do that kind of work? So those kind of things that, if you're looking at 10 properties, they can all start to blur. So hopefully this checklist will help you remember which property is which, but also before you get to the open homes, give you a bit of an idea of exactly the definite requirements that you need, because otherwise, there's a lot out there and you can be spending quite a long time at the opens. So on that note, make sure before you head to open homes you have a good breakfast, and maybe pack some things like muesli bars, apples, because we see you there, working long days, but you get through a lot more than we do, and making sure you've got the energy, had some water, all those kind of things, and maybe even give yourself a lunch break, makes the process a bit more relaxing and a bit less stressful. One other thing, I believe All Homes has just done an upgrade to their app, where now if you mark in overall, All Homes, but their app wasn't that great, but if you find the properties you want, you've got a profile, you can mark in which open homes you're going to, and it will create a little map for you, which, if you don't want to hop on Google, can save you. So what I'm here to talk about is just a couple of things. First, as we have said, we've created a VIP buyer group for the people looking in Belconnen. So hop on Facebook, send a request to join that. We've kept it closed just so it is, people who are looking to buy, just not the neighbours checking out maybe if their neighbours are selling. We'll be letting people know of properties before they come on the market. So as Sandra said, we do have to have a contract. So when we get that, what we can do before that is send a message saying, hey, we've got this great 3-bedroom coming up. It's going to be in this general area and this sort of guide. If you're looking at that kind of property, send us a message and then we'll make sure that we notify you when we're going to do the first opening. We're finding that a lot more buyers are wanting to get through properties before the open home and beat the rush, and a lot of our owners are also potentially wanting to sell but not have to go through the open home. So like, Sarah, Mark, if you've got someone who wants our property, let us know, we'll get the contract, but we don't want the neighbours knowing. or whatever their reasons are, or hey, we want to sell at Christmas, but if you find someone before, do it. So if you join that, we're not going to be spamming you with any information about us. All it is just the properties, either a little spiel or marked in a video, just letting you know, and then you can message us for more details. But yeah, we won't be trying to advertise anything there for you. That's what we're going to cover. So what we wanted to chat about is the process of making an offer. So once you've gone and spoken to Steve, and he's told you how much you can borrow, then you've done a few opens with Mark's advice, and you've gone, okay, this is the one I love. As Sandra said, you can get a copy of the contract. Now, if it's a house, we'll have a building report, and as agents, we do check it, and we do have to legally tell you if there's anything. If you ask us, say, is there any big problems in the property that I should be aware of? We can't say, oh, no. If we've read it and we know that the garage is unapproved, we can say, yep, garage is unapproved, they bought it like that, but there's nothing structural. You can then make your decision based on that. So, always better for you to read it, but if you do want to get our recap of it, you can do that. Now, how every agent handles the offer, pricing is completely different. So there's no guidebook. There's guidebooks for how we have to legally act and behave and represent and pass on offers, but how we handle it varies between offices, between personalities. So the best thing I can say, rather than saying this is what we should do, is when you go to the open home, ask the agent. So the main things I'd say to ask them about is, if it's a plus, ask them, are they looking for offers over, or are they just looking for around that? Because, for example, if I do something plus, we're usually looking above, but the other agent, they might sell at 5,000 below the plus. You don't know, so say, ask them, and they're going to give you some kind of guide. They're not that helpful, you'll be able to read by their body language, or just call us and we'll give you some advice. Second, how do they handle through there? And there's a few people that like the property. You're seeing each other here and you're like, I've seen those people that have got their finance, I've seen the other quote, they really like this one. Ask the agent, if you make an offer that's acceptable to the owner, are they going to stop showing it? Are they going to want to look at other offers? What will happen if another offer's made? Will you let us know? Will they just go with the highest offer? Because once again, personally what I do is if there is another offer, we let all parties know and usually give everyone the chance to make their best and final offer. But some agents handle it differently. Some they go, well sorry, Mark made a higher offer, owner's happy with that, yeah, we'll find something else. So it is very different between agencies and there's no laws actually regulating what we have to do that. So if any of those things happen, the best way to do is ask the agent what their personal practice is with it, and yeah, ask if they'll stop showing the property, ask if particulars before you make an offer. What does the owner want for a settlement time? If we offered a longer settlement for them to find their next home, would that be of interest? So you might be able to negotiate on things like that. I always use the example 100,000. Obviously, we're not going to find anything for that, but if the property's on for 100,000, you love it, you're happy with that. The owner wants, a 90-day settlement. They might be flexible with the price if you're able to meet that condition, because most buyers want to get in within 30 days. Also, in terms of tenants, ask them, have the tenants, if you're looking to move in, have the tenants indicated if they've, if we gave them compensation, if maybe they might move out earlier. All tenants are protected by the tenancy laws, but you can approach them through their property manager and say, hey, if we gave you $1,000 to help move, you didn't have to move at Christmas and compete with all the other tenants at that time, would that be of benefit? And one of the other big things, so as we said, you need to check all the appliances. Now some owners, this varies, some owners will say, listen, that was broken, we're leaving it like that, but check those, ask, once again, the agent, are these things going to be fixed? Because sometimes I've had properties where it settled, there was tiles broken in the bathroom, and the buyer said, well, need those replaced. And I was like, I'm sorry, it was like that. And sometimes, unfortunately, buyers think we're trying to, not help them, but we're bound by the law that the property was like that. We can't force the owner to do anything. Their solicitor's going to give them advice and say, it was like that, don't do it. Now, lastly, in terms of cleanliness, obviously your first-home buyer, so at the moment you're probably renting, and the conditions that you have to go through in keeping the property clean and tidy and what you have to do when you move out. Don't expect the same when an owner moves out of their property. So ask the agent, if you go to a property and you sort of think, it's probably, there's a fair bit of dust, it needs a good good clean, the walls are pretty dirty, ask the agent, you know, as part of our offer, you know, we'd like it to be professionally cleaned and the carpets cleaned, because the owners actually don't have to. And unfortunately, a number of times I've had properties, or colleagues have had properties where the owners haven't cleaned the carpets, they haven't cleaned the bath. I've, you know, cleaned a couple ovens and showers before, so at least the buyer had, you know, some clean spaces to go into. But we can't actually force it. And I'm sure Sandra's had plenty of a client where you think, oh, I can't believe you're doing this to the people. But they're not bound. And if you delay settlement, there's actually probably, and that probably be a question we can ask Sandra, with the risk.
Yeah, so one of the, so there is a clause in the contract that actually states that the seller just has to leave the property clean and tidy. So when I'm acting for a buyer, one of the first things I always say is everybody's idea of clean and tidy is a lot different. So some people might go, ooh, there's a bit of dust, it's not tidy. And in other cases, there could be, you know, sellers' rubbish everywhere. So generally at the start, I'll say to the buyer, was it clean when you inspected it? You know, is at an open home, have they, you know, is it clean, is it tidy? Because if it's clean and tidy at open home, you've got a great start. If it's not clean and tidy at the open home and the sellers haven't made that effort to get it tidy for that, then that rings alarm bells with me. And the first thing I'd normally suggest to the buyer is that we ask for a special condition to be added to the contract, that A, B and C will be specifically removed, and you'll just do a special condition to reinstate that clause that's really already in the contract, but you can just help clarify it a little bit. So that's something, as a good point that Sarah's made. If it's not clean and tidy at the start, be wary, and it may not get better. So you want to raise that with your solicitor or conveyancer at the start. And if really, I mean, I always ask that question anyway. So hopefully you're being asked the right questions at your appointment with your solicitor or your conveyancer. But that's something I'll always sort of say. Everybody's idea of clean and tidy is different. So it's something to be wary of, because the contract is very open in that regard.
Yeah. I've had it go both ways. One where I've seen it a bit, I was like, oh, I don't know if this is clean. I was like, oh, I'm happy. And you're like, okay, we're all happy then, as long as everyone's happy.
Yeah.
Another thing to think about as well of knowing when you're making an offer is what kind of deposit you're wanting to put. Pretty standard that most we ask for 10%, but sometimes there's special conditions if people have got money either held up overseas, or if you've got a term deposit and that's going to expire sort of 2 weeks after, and you don't want to break that and lose your interest. So know that what your conditions are, what settlement time you want, what deposit you want, and yeah, I guess what condition you want as well, knowing that when you inspect it, you should see it as that, and if there's anything you want changed, you need to bring that up at that point, because what happens is, for the minds of the owner, once the owner accepts the offer, in their mind that money is now theirs, that's it. If you come back and say, you know, we want this fixed, and you know, it might say it's $1,500, like, well, you didn't bring that up before. It's in their mind, they've lost the money, where really it was part of negotiation. So it's always better to ask upfront for these things and make that negotiation, because the owner's going to be a lot more flexible and less likely to feel offside. Because a lot of the times we see we're the intermediate and we sort of say, no, the buyers are really nice, they're not trying to offend you, but it does sort of sometimes, if we're trying to make changes afterwards, puts the owner off a little bit side. So I think that probably covers the main things that we pick up. Is it sort of over to you, what sort of questions you've got from all four of us? If there's one last. If you do buy a property that's tenanted, make sure that you get a copy of the condition report. So most of the contracts, their lease will be in there, so you know that thing. But if you get a copy of the condition report, that way you know what the condition was when the tenant moved in, because you'll think it has to be clean and tidy, immaculate, because that's what I have to do. But if the tenant moved into the property and it wasn't clean and tidy and immaculate, then they don't have to leave it in that condition. So just make sure that often the condition report isn't in there, and maybe because the agent doesn't want to put it in there, but that way at least you know exactly what you're dealing with. So yeah. Questions? Kate, Kate's lovely. Kate from our Monica office. So if you decide to head into the Kingston area and want some lake views rather than the Belconnen Lake, she's the one to talk to. What we might do is then leave it. If you want to come up and ask any of us any questions, we do have a form in there that just says if you want to provide your details for any of us to get in touch, just circle yes or no. But yeah, thank you very much for coming along. breaking the cold. Yeah, we'll talk soon.
How do I stop that?